Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session, Thought Diversity, coming to an organization near you. I'm so glad that you've chosen to join us today for this dynamic presentation on a topic that I truly am passionate about. My name is Jeremy York, and I'm the lead consultant and president of InvigorateHR, a human resources consulting firm focused on putting people first in the way that we look at our human resource function. Now, before we dive in and get started, I want to ask you a question. Think about a time when you've asked someone or given directions to someone to perform a task or to carry out, a project, etc. My question for you is, did they do it exactly the same way that you would do it, or did they do it differently? Chances are that they probably did it a little differently, right? And that's the beauty of all of us and the way that we think and the way that we process information. You see, thought diversity is just that. The way that we approach something, all the different ways of being able to do things that, that make us, that make us unique, right? The way that we think, the way that we act, the way that we interpret information, etc. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about thought diversity as that next element of diversity. I'd like to share a quote with you from Morgan Freeman. And that is one of the biggest mistakes that we make is assuming that other people think the same way we do, right? That makes so much sense. And how many of you have been caught up in that? I know I have been, and I do at times, thinking that other people think like I do, or they're going to process information like I do, or they're going to do something the way that I do it. But we have to know that people do it differently, right? And that there's more than one way of being able to do something. And I know that we all know that, right? We've talked about that probably throughout our lives and many things, or we've seen that in being able to manage people as leaders. But what we have to understand is that thought diversity is this concept of us understanding that there's more than one way to be able to do something and that people aren't all the same and that they're different and they think differently. You see, leaders and organizations have to let go of this idea that there's one right way to do things. Now, I know if you're like me, you might be guilty of this, thinking that your way is the best way, and that might be true for you. But for other people, that may not be the best way, right? So instead of focusing on, creating one right way of doing something, maybe we need to focus on creating a learning culture where people feel, hey, I'm accepted for who I am, right? Feeling accepted because I know that people appreciate the way that I do things, or my perspective, or my viewpoints, or my way of processing information, right? But we want to focus on creating these environments where people are comfortable contributing ideas, where they're, able to seek out new ways of doing things and bring that to the table, where they can learn from one another. One of the greatest things that we have at work is our ability to be able to rely on and collaborate with one another to be able to learn and do things. Think about it in your own situation about, maybe you've had bosses or other leaders that taught you things that you didn't know, that you were able to learn from watching them, learn from asking questions, or learn by doing, right? Things that they have picked up along their way through their experiences, through, their upbringing, their relationships that they've had, all of those kinds of things that help them get to the point to where they're at today. And honestly, that's what thought diversity is all about. So let me share this definition with you about thought diversity. You see, thought diversity is this next level of diversity. And I know we're in a climate right now where diversity isn't necessarily being embraced like it once was. But I'm offering you an alternative way of looking at thought diversity as being a different type of diversity, not so much focused on demographics, but but being focused on thought or cognitive diversity, right? Our ability to be able to reason and think and our perspectives, etc. And so thought diversity is just that. It's our differences in perspectives. It's our differences in the experiences that we've had in our upbringings that have shaped the way that we think, the way that we process information, and the way that we actually perceive things. It's more than just physical traits that we've kind of relied on in diversity. Typical diversity as we know it has been more demographically focused, right? And, when I ask people about, what comes to mind when you think about diversity? Well, it's all of those things that we've been taught for so many years about race and gender, and those kinds of things. But we forget about how much of a broader definition diversity truly has. And it's not just on or about demographics, it's about also the way that we think and process information. You see, thought diversity, as I like to call it, is this next frontier, right? So, what does that mean? Well, it means that it's a broader element of diversity that we really need to be looking at. Not so much focused on those demographics, but focused on, the people's abilities and their experiences and their perspectives, which leads to opportunity. Those are the things that we really should be focused on and should be talking more about within our workplaces as it relates to anything, around diversity. And so, diversity or thought diversity is a concept that we all really have known all of our lives. So, here's the deal. I want you to finish the phrase for me, right? Okay, you ready? Here we go. Two heads are better than, you got it, one. Two heads are better than one. That's something that you've been taught all along, right? And we've heard, right, that other people can bring other perspectives. But I feel, though, as if times when we get older, that sometimes, for the lack of better words, sometimes I feel like we get dumber or we forget about those things that we were taught early on in our humanity, right? And then being younger and understanding as we were children, what have you, and figuring out what that really means in the big world or in the adulting world. Well, two heads are better than one because people bring in different perspectives. I've not lived the same life as you, and you have not lived the same life as me. We've been to different places, we've been around different people, we've worked different jobs, we've had different hobbies, we have different families and upbringings. The beauty of all of that means that we've had all of these different experiences that allows us to be able to solve problems and to reason, to be creative, to work through scenarios or situations differently. See, those unique blend of what we would say is our culture and those experiences, that impacts on how we think or how we process information, even how we negotiate and get things done, how we accomplish those tasks. That helps us to be able to do that. And some people who haven't had the same experiences may not be able to do the same things that we can. So that's why two heads are better than one. Collaboration is important. You see, by focusing on and realizing a person's full potential, right? And what they're able to bring to the table, because we understand that they have a unique perspective shaped by their background, right? And that might be, as I said, their upbringing. It could be socioeconomic. It could be, part of their culture. It could be part of it that shaped the way that they look at things. Part of, whether they went to public school or private school, whether they had a family who was deeply rooted in religion or someone who wasn't. All of those things just means it's all differently in the way that we kind of approach things. That is really where we need to understand and have a little bit more of our focus. You see, when we think about thought diversity, it brings all of those things that make us a whole person, all of those things that make us uniquely our own selves, right, into consideration while we're at work, and understands that thought diversity goes well beyond those traditional diversity discussions. So, what do I mean by that? Well, it means that we're just not focused on the demographics. We're just not focused on the race and the gender. We're just not focused on, whether someone's what part of community that they're in, if they're, disabled or all of these things. It means that we look at them for the whole person. We're not trying to necessarily put them into boxes, traditional boxes, as we would call it, for diversity, right? And what that looks like. It means that we're looking at them from all of their diverse viewpoints that they can bring to the table, which impacts the way that we, solve problems, the way that we have ideation, the way that we create, innovation and spawn that. But before someone can actually do that, we have to be able to, one, see them as a whole person. But even before that, we have to create environments where they feel safe to express their ideas. Now, I want to ask you this question. Have you ever worked somewhere where you felt apprehensive of being able to share your ideas or being able to share your perspective. I want you to think about that for a minute. Somewhere that you didn't necessarily feel like you could be yourself, to where you didn't feel like that you could provide input. And a lot of that has to do with the way that the workplace culture is structured, right? We may have chosen not to share those perspectives because we were afraid of looking stupid. We were afraid of being ridiculed. We were afraid of people laughing at us. Or we were afraid that we were going to get shot down. And perhaps that's notable because we've done it before and our ideas have been dismissed. But there's several reasons behind why we don't actually, share those perspectives or look at that. Now, this is where I always like to share a perspective because one of my own stories as it relates to this, because it really does have to be about the environment that we're in. And I can remember being in high school and I had an English lit teacher who had a practice of calling on you. And so many teachers did this, I imagine, that they would call on you and for the answer to a question, right? Checking to see if you actually did the assignment or what have you. But this particular teacher, not only would she do that, but whenever you didn't have the answer, or perhaps it wasn't the answer she was looking for, she had a way of being able to um, kind of belittle you in such a way that really made you feel bad about being wrong or maybe it not being the answer she wanted, etc. She also had a practice of going through, and if we had a quiz or anything like that, she would go through the grade book and she would read everyone who got an A on the exam to the whole class or to the quiz. And this was the kind of environment that she created, right? And so, an environment of fear really is what it was, where people were afraid to contribute for being wrong or being ridiculed, where people were afraid of, people finding out that they didn't do as well on the exam, etc. And I tell this story in a way to help explain and illustrate that it's all about the environment that we create on how we tap into thought diversity and how we allow it, right? If we are in environments that don't support that kind of free thought or that kind of sharing, we're not going to get it. We're going to miss out, and we're not going to allow people to be able to feel like they can be their whole selves when they're at work, right? And they're going to come in guarded, and that doesn't help us be able to, problem solve to the best of our ability, to be able to ideate and be creative and problem solve in that best way forward. So when we think about thought diversity and being able to, respect people for their perspectives and really encourage them to bring that in, we have to understand that we have to create this environment, right? To be able to allow people to be able to do that. Not only is it an inclusive environment that, really does promote sharing of perspectives, but we also have to create an environment where we know that we need different perspectives and we seek out those kinds of perspectives. So, really, what I'm talking about here is this intersectionality of thought diversity as it plays in. So, different aspects of our identity, and that's what I mean when I say bring our whole selves to work, right? It's our identity, right? Who we are and the things that shape us into that identity. Different aspects of this identity influence our thinking and perspectives. And I know I've kind of been repeating that on and on, but I want to make sure that you understand and you kind of get that when we're thinking about thought diversity. Because this idea of cognitive thinking, and having being diverse, right? Whereas we don't want the same thing, is often a result of our identities and our experiences coming together that drive the way that we shape and operate, right? Does that make sense to you all? So it's this blending of our identity, what's made us up, and our experiences coming together to help us be able to have that ability to think and thought. This is where we sometimes get tripped up, right? And you've probably heard many times people talking about to you or saying, we should be hiring for cultural fit. right? We should bring in people who fit our culture. And while I don't necessarily disagree with that, because we want people who align well with our values, right? We want them to align well with our core values of what we're doing. We want them to be able to align with our philosophies and how we deal with our customers or how we deal with our employees and our staff, right? We want those kinds of things. But we should also be looking at cultural add and not just 100% at culture fit. So here, let me explain the difference between the two, between culture fit and culture add. So culture fit, which we're all familiar with, uh, is that, it's like that approach that we've been using to focus on things, that a person would have in common to align with the organization's culture. And so we try to hire for people like that. But what sometimes happens is that we begin to hire more people who are just like us and similar to us because we say, oh, well, if I'm a good fit for the culture, I need to hire people just like me. I need to hire more people like myself or people that are similar. Well, while that might seem like that's a good idea, we're missing out on a key component is that, birds of a feather flock together. Yes, my family's all from East Tennessee, and so we love our sayings. And so birds of a feather flock together, right? So it means that they're all very similar. But culture add is a little different and challenges us to look at things a little differently. And so it's more about a an approach to where we focus on things that we're missing within our group, our department. Instead of focusing just on the cultural things, let's bring in people who maybe have unique perspectives and experiences that many of us don't have on the team, right? Or maybe they've been in other kinds of positions or work for different kinds of companies, or they come from different backgrounds, that help shape their perspective. Because then those unique perspectives, those unique ideas and experiences, that enhances our ability to even be stronger in the way that we approach doing work, right? So that we now have another person who's different, a different perspective. They can help challenge some of the ways that we were doing things or, bring in new perspectives on the way that we were doing things because we are all caught up in the same kind of ways of thinking. So looking at cultural add versus cultural fit, we really want to be focused on really kind of both. We want them to align with the organizations, but we also want them to be different in their experiences, their background, maybe even their education, other jobs that they've held, etc., that would be able to bring that into our group to help strengthen the team or strengthen our business function, right? Well, part of this is that we have to think about and look at some limitations that we've had, right? And we've been focused, as I said earlier, on a lot of demographic diversity, those surface level demographics, things that we want to check the box or measure. Yes, do we have people of color working here? Okay, check the box. Yes, do we have single parents working here? Yes, check the box. Yes, do we have people who identify as part of the LGBTQIA plus community? Okay, yes, check that box. We've been looking at those demographics, and that's how we've measured things, right? But this broader aspect of diversity goes far beyond that. And so it's that other things that shape our thoughts and our perspectives is what's important for us to think about, right? And the thing is that through this journey that we've been on with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, I think our intent has always been to try to capture those different perspectives, and we've understood that those perspectives are important. Just the way that we've approached it probably wasn't the most accurate way, right? And for us to go through. And so that's why we got so tripped up and focused on these demographic elements when really the true components of what have been saying diversity is about the different experiences people have because they are different than us, the different backgrounds they have because they are different than us. Those are the things we really have found to be important, but we've been caught up on these demographics where we really need to be thinking about some of these factors that go beyond those demographics, really that help make people who they are, right? And so factors shaping our thoughts and our behaviors are things like our upbringing and cultural background, our education and our life experiences, and our personality traits and cognitive style. So let's talk a little bit about that. Because I don't think we dive into these enough. And I know a lot of people are feel like that they're afraid to have these conversations or to understand, but these are part of the identity of these folks who are working for us that we need to understand and be able to encourage them to bring into work and into what we do every day. So let's talk about our upbringing and cultural backgrounds. And those are going to be things like, our family values, those social norms that we were taught from our families, which are all different, right? Depending on our background, what kinds of families we came from, if our families were first generation families or if they were, multi-generation families from the area, just whatever that might be for us. It's also things like how we were taught to communicate and how we were taught to problem solve. And, that really differs if you think about it from family to family, where a lot of times you could probably remember this too. Again, here we go with these old sayings, but children are to be seen and not heard, right? We hear that a lot of time. Well, what does that teach a child if they're hearing that all the time versus a parent or how a child was raised to be able to actively participate in the way that the family works and operates, right? And if the children were given a voice or they asked what their perspective was, that has a lot to do with it. And those are two different kinds of upbringings, right? Where maybe sometimes family was taught to be very, very close and you stuck together side by side, where times others, in other kinds of families, that wasn't the case, where family wasn't close and they didn't have those kinds of upbringing. So that shapes how people interact with others and how they see things. Think about our education and our life experiences. Those who went on to have secondary education, those who didn't, or those who didn't have an opportunity, right? Because of other circumstances. That impacts the way that we see things, right? The things that we might have studied and become an expert in that other people haven't, and maybe they've studied things and were expert into something different. Travel, whether it's local travel or it's global travel, that shapes your understanding of the world. So all of these different things plays into the way that we see things, right? I can remember the first time that I traveled out of the country and on a major trip and went to Europe and thinking about how my eyes were open because I had this idea of a way of life that we were taught here as Americans, right? So then I traveled to Europe and I go to a few different countries that were different than us, obviously, and learned about how they live and things that they do. And just some of the things that we take for granted here that necessarily aren't their practices there. That was very eye-opening to me and made me much more appreciative. And now I have that bigger perspective and bigger view. And that also helps shape how I assess and problem solve and look and contribute, right? Those are all part of it. And then last but not least, our personality traits and our cognitive styles. And so that's really kind of our ways of learning and our ways of being able to process information, whether I'm extroverted, which obviously you can probably tell I am, versus introversion, people who are more analytical versus people who are more creative. I mean, I have people on my team and I see other people that are out there in workplaces who are uber creative and being able to create all types of wonderful artistic kinds of contributions to the work that I wish that I could do, but I just don't have those capabilities, right? So I value those people, and that's who they are, and they bring that to work, right? When we're thinking about potential clients or those people that we serve, right? And think about who our target market might be, other people who might be able to relate to them, right? If I'm trying to, go into a different market or segment a specific kind of market, and I don't have anyone from my team or anyone contributing that has, have lived experiences like those other, that market or is familiar with that market or knows about it, then the chances of me being on target for whatever it is we're doing is probably going to be off a little bit versus bringing someone who's familiar with that market and maybe understands the culture or understands the backgrounds or the challenges that they have every day. So if you can kind of understand, do you see where I'm going here about how important it is for us to understand what this looks like and what that means for us? This is the true value of thought diversity in our work. And it means that if you think about this, when we have people who bringing their full identity, their full selves to work, and they're using that to do work every day, we have things like improved problem solving and innovation, right? Because we can combine these different perspectives and viewpoints to be able to generate new ideas, right? We challenge the way that we've always done things. Just because it worked now doesn't necessarily going to work in the future. I mean, I know that I've been to those places where, and you probably have too, where you bring new ideas and they say, oh, well, we tried that once before and it didn't work. Well, that was 10 years ago. The world is a different place now. Maybe we should try it again, right? Those are the kind of things that we challenge when we bring these different perspectives. Helps us have the better understanding of our diverse customer and stakeholder needs. That's what I was getting at before. Like if we're going after a market or we're looking at a particular group, we need to be able to align and understand their backgrounds and viewpoints so that we can make sure that our products are really providing what they need and our services are providing what they need, and we can be more inclusive in being able to provide those services to that group. It's not a one size fits all for everyone all the time. And then when we think about fostering an inclusive work environment, I know that's something you probably have heard a lot of, but let's think about it different. Let's think about an environment that, one, yes, is focused on a person being able to bring their whole selves to work, right? That's important. And the reason that we want them to do that is because we want them to feel heard and valued. We want them to understand that their perspective, their experiences, and their contributions are important to the success within our business function. What does that mean, right? It helps them. And think about it from your own perspective. Like where you've worked sometime where you really felt like that you were heard and you were valued. What did that do to you? How did you respond? Most likely you found yourself probably being super satisfied with the job. You probably stuck around longer. You felt important. You felt like that people wanted you to be there every day. And that was the value you found in that particular job. I know that's been true for me in places where I've worked where I feel like I was a contributor. I remember my first boss in my first HR role, right? She was awesome. She was a great mentor to me. And she was very big on soliciting feedback from the team on different things that we were doing. She wanted to understand our viewpoints and our perspective because she understood that she didn't have all the answers, nor, would anyone else. But we were stronger when we had a diverse team, right? Because we brought all these different ideas into play and would help her be able to be more effective as a leader and a manager and run our HR function. You see, when we have a diverse team with diverse thinkers, it keeps us from getting into this idea of group think. Now, I don't know, some of you may have heard that term before, group think, and if you have, kudos to you. But group think is this idea that we all see things the same way and that we all just start agreeing on things, right? Where we don't have anyone challenging us and we're all so much alike that we just kind of see it similarly. I don't know about you, but for me, when I think about the team that I built in my business, I want those diverse perspectives. I want people to bring different ideas, and I want them to challenge the way that we're doing things. Because I know that that allows us to be better, right? It puts us in a better position because we have those perspectives. And so when we think about having diverse thinkers, we can kind of eliminate groupthink, right? Because we've got different people thinking about things. And it also helps us stay on our toes, right? It increases the scale of these new insights, of us being able to understand new ways of doing things. So, for example, think about where we're at right now. You find yourself in a world where AI is becoming an everyday mention, and it's creeping into our work, and people don't know what to do. They don't know what's going on. But think about having people on your team or surrounding yourself with people who are embracing AI, and it helps us to be able to understand how it can work for us, right? Perhaps you are a person who would never want to go out and seek out the information about it, but you have other people on your team who are pushing you for that because they are diverse thinkers. You see, those are the people that help our organization rise to the top, into that next level, to keep us growing, to keep us, making sure that we're maintaining our edge in what we do. We also know that if we have these kinds of people on our team, they can help us tackle some of the most pressing issues and problems that we face. We know that working in HR is a challenging job. We know we're faced with new things all the time, that not every day is the same. And we've got new issues to face. Heck, think about 5 years ago when this thing called COVID came into our world that challenged us significantly on the way that we had to think and work and process and solve problems, right? And we did have to be very, very creative and innovative in the way that we addressed and looked at that because we had never faced anything like that before. When you have those diverse thinkers on your team, they continue to help you be able to rise above those challenges and come up with strong answers, right? Being able to embrace that diversity, the diversity of thought, those people who have those different backgrounds and experiences. But that's not always easy for us. Sometimes it can be quite difficult. And one of the reasons that is several different reasons, right? Not just one. And so that's my question for you. Think about this. What keeps us from embracing thought diversity? Think about it. Diversity of thought, looking at people for their true selves, having them bring their full identity to work, their whole selves. We look at them and want them to share their perspectives. But why don't we embrace it and welcome it and bring it in and create cultures that support it? That's the million-dollar question, right? And I think we can agree on that there's more than one particular element. But the first and biggest is probably fear. We're afraid of the things that we don't know. We're afraid of things that are unfamiliar to us. We are afraid of looking silly or stupid or uneducated or not, not like we have our stuff together, right? It's that fear that keeps us. And somehow, and I don't know why and where we pick this up along our life's journey, is that we feel like asking questions makes us look ignorant. And that's not the case at all. You've heard people say it. I know I've said it. The only ignorant question is the unasked question. But fear drives so much of that, of being afraid of what it is we don't know, right? We also have a lack of awareness that sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. And part of that has to do with our own issues. One of the things that we don't spend enough time doing and that we're afraid, there you go, ties it back to fear, that we're afraid of doing a lot of times is kind of going in and being introspective and taking a deep dive and looking at ourselves on who we are, why we do things. Do you ever sit there and ask yourself that, or, kind of assess yourself and think about, well, why do I behave this way? Or why do I respond this way? Or why do I say things like this? Or why does this trigger me? When we begin to dive in and start doing some searching within ourselves, that helps us create a little bit more of that awareness about our blind spots. And blind spots are things that are hidden from us. And typically they're hidden from us on purpose because we don't want to know them about ourselves, right? And so we have to really take a good look inside and ask ourselves, you know, are there things that I'm doing that aren't contributing to this? Am I as welcoming as I think that I am? Am I respecting people as much as I should be respecting them? How am I showing up every day at work in my responses? What does that look like? Is that helping me? Or am I secretly afraid of looking silly or looking uneducated or looking dumb? And I'm afraid to bring other people on my team who might be smarter in certain areas than I am because I feel like that's a poor reflection on me, right? But what we have to understand is that we want to hire people who are smarter than us. We want to bring people into the organization that have different strengths than we do because that's how we balance out a team. That's how we strengthen the team overall. Then we have this element of programming. And what's interesting about programming is that this is all the stuff that we've been taught that sometimes we have to unlearn, right? We've been taught maybe certain biases that we aren't familiar with, and then that maybe they're unconscious, or maybe we do know what they are, but we're afraid because to address them, and we haven't really went through that whole soul searching and we still have that lack of awareness. We haven't become aware of what those are. Sometimes those are things we have to unteach ourselves on how we do things because a lot of times how we were taught one way doesn't necessarily work in the future. And one of the biggest illustrations of that is our generations within the workplace, how we manage baby boomers versus how we manage millennials, or how we manage Generation X, or how we manage any other generation. It's all very different, right? So certain things we may have to unlearn along the way. But one of the biggest reasons that we have a barrier to thought diversity, and I mentioned it already with this programming element, is unconscious bias. You see, everyone has unconscious bias. No one is free from any type of bias. And a lot of times we just don't know it, right? And unconscious bias are those attitudes or those perspectives or those stereotypes that impact our ability to be able to understand people, or it impacts our ability to take, true inclusive action or to make decisions. And sometimes these unconscious biases influence our decision making and the way that we act toward people, right? Maybe we've had an experience with a certain type of person before that makes us react a different way toward other people who are similarly situated and with all of that. And we all have it. Here's an example I like to use. Think about this. How many of you, you might be stopped at a stoplight and you see someone kind of crossing the street or kind of getting close to your car, approaching your car or something like that, and you see them and you make some judgments about them based on how you see it, and you reach over and you hit the lock button for the door lock. Even though your car has automatic locks, when you put it in gear, you know the doors are locked, but you go and do that, right? And it's okay. We could admit these kind of things to ourselves, and we should, because that's like an unconscious bias to where we have associated danger or something with that person to where we need to go make sure that we protect ourselves. You see, the way our mind, the human brain thinks, we're processing so much information all the time that our brain automatically begins to make split decisions this quickly, right? Make split decisions based on our experiences and what we've taught, what we know, or what we've been exposed to. And it's those automatic kind of implicit associations that influence our actions and our behaviors. So it's those biases that we have that influence the way that we behave, right, and our actions we take, and they're all influenced by our background, our cultural environments, and personal experiences. Which means that if we aren't exposed to a great deal of different cultures or different peoples or different perspectives, etc., then we may have some unconscious biases that trigger our decision making or the actions that we take from that standpoint. And so that's the part that we really have to try to become more aware of and understanding what those are. And so, again, when I talk about these unconscious biases, like I said, we all have them. I have them. You have them. Everyone has them, right? They're all there. But the thing is that the more that we begin to look and self-reflect and look at ourselves, that's how we can mitigate some of those unconscious biases so that we can be able to welcome and create more of those environments that people that are different from us, who have different perspectives, right? That have those different lived experiences. So here are just some strategies that I want to share with you from our standpoint of how we mitigate some of that unconscious bias. And part of that is self-awareness and reflection, right? That was part of the fear. So we have to acknowledge our own biases and our blind spots. We have to look at that. We need to ask for feedback from other diverse colleagues, et cetera. And this is something that I do. I'm very proud to say that, people on my team, we have a great deal of diversity and diverse thinkers on our team. And sometimes I have to go to those people and say, okay, I need you to help me. I need you to help me check myself on this. Like, am I looking at this from a very narrow lens, or am I on board with this? Am I in alignment with all this? And so I ask for them to give me feedback about, certain things that I see or that I will want to do, et cetera, because I don't have some of the same experiences. So I'm relying on them to help shepherd me, if you will, and figure out what I need to do. We also look at things like inclusive hiring and promotion practices, and we can do that through making sure that we have a structured interviews and maybe even have interview panels that are diverse thinkers, have standardized evaluation criteria so that we can measure that per person and try to eliminate as much bias as we possibly can. And then just fostering a culture of open dialogue. And this is probably a little bit harder than you think it is because you really have to create the safe space around this where we encourage employees to voice their diverse viewpoints and perspectives, and that we make sure that we're addressing any type of biases or anything like that as they may come up. And that's important for us to really pay attention to from that standpoint, to make sure that we're creating those environments where people are strong, feel strongly about sharing their perspective. They feel welcome. We encourage them to be able to do that. But a huge part of this, as I said before, is making sure that we create those safe spaces. And this is where I usually get a question, and people say, okay, Jeremy, I get it. I understand about these safe spaces, but what do you really even mean by creating safe spaces? We hear that word a lot, but no one really knows what it is. What does it mean? Well, here, I'm going to tell you exactly what it means. It really means creating psychological safety. And perhaps that's a term that's new to you, maybe not, maybe you heard it before, but it's an important practice of creating an environment where we allow people to be able to share their viewpoints and perspective without any kind of retribution. That's what psychological safety is, where they're not afraid or thinking that they're going to be in trouble or they're going to get ridiculed or they're going to get, called stupid or, harassed or any of these other kinds of things for sharing those types of perspectives. Very much the opposite of that example I told you about my high school English literature teacher, right? About creating that environment of fear where you were afraid to say or do anything unless you absolutely knew it was right. This is the opposite of that, where you're creating an environment for collaboration, for ideation, for creativity, right? And it's us as leaders, we have to model this curiosity and active listening to where we begin to engage people to say, what do you think? Or what's your perspective on that? Or, hey, I haven't heard from you on this, and I'm curious to get your input. Those are all practices that I have found to be very, very beneficial in being able to solicit feedback and perspectives from other people because it's important, right? Now, we can't just do that and pay it lip service. We have to mean what we actually say. So that's why active listening is so important. And so when we think about active listening, and also encouraging respectful debate, meaning that we're going to have discussions, this helps support this kind of environment of psychological safety. So if we want to make sure that we, one, create that environment, that safe environment, and that we want to say active listening is part of what we do, and we also encourage dialogue, then we have to make sure that we understand and get people comfortable with what that actually means. So typically when we are engaging in active listening, that we're listening to actually understand the message and that we're feeding information back to them to show that we actually understand, right? And so we might reiterate what they had to say or say things like, well, so this is what I heard you say. Is that correct? Right? And we do that. And then we can start to begin to understand how we can begin to have debate around that and say, okay, this is how I heard you say it. Is that correct? Oh, okay, great. Okay, but I think I have a different perspective on that, and here's where I'm coming from. This is where we engage in that constructive disagreement, right? And people will do this if we focus on an understanding of each person's perspective, and we want to understand, not just hearing, but we're actually listening. And that we also want to maintain a spirit of mutual learning because we want to seek to understand, good old Stephen Covey, seek to understand what that person's actually sharing with us. And then we can begin to give our differing perspectives, right? And one way that you can do that as a leader is to kind of help facilitate some of these kinds of discussions by encouraging everyone to be heard, managing any type of power dynamic, so not giving anyone too much time to be able to contribute, or acknowledging that someone might have a higher status in the organization, but acknowledging that other people's perspectives are just important. So, for example, you might say, "Okay, Jeremy, yeah, well, from a manager standpoint, I totally get that. But from an employee standpoint, that's the perspective I think we're missing. So what does you, the team, as employees, what do you feel like needs to be addressed here? Right. So I've kind of leveled that power dynamic of what that looks like. And then, of course, just being able to kind of summarize what we've talked about and pulling that all together. This is one area that I think that we could really grow and develop even more in to be able to help create an environment that does truly um, focus on thought diversity and allow people to be heard. It's an active listening and this respectful debate is good. It's good for us to have conversations and to give different perspectives. And we don't always have to agree on everything. It's okay to agree to disagree, but it all gives us certain things to be thinking about. I can't tell you how many times I've pitched something out to my staff and about what I'm thinking, and they come back and say, "Well, I don't know. Have you thought about this? Or did you think about this? Or did you think about that?" And I'll be like, "Oh, wow, that's good. I totally missed that. Let me ponder that for a little bit more and let me, chew on that and kind of figure out where we need to go from that perspective." So this is one element that I highly encourage you to be able to, to adopt and to get to know and to build into your culture. This is something that we really want to encourage. Now, I know it will be difficult. You've got some managers that probably don't want to do this. You've got some managers that, think their way is the only way. Well, that's something you're going to have to work on from a cultural issue. And that could be a problem for the culture you're trying to build within the organization if you truly want to embrace thought diversity and make sure that that's part of your everyday ways of working. So let's talk about how we leverage this idea of thought diversity throughout the organization. And that's kind of where I was leading to whenever I talked about, yeah, you might have some managers on board and you may not. So what does that mean? Well, it means that truly, if we want to adopt this as a cultural plan or a cultural component and really want to pay attention to thought diversity, we need to have cross-functional collaboration, which means that we need to have different kinds of teams or different kinds of people, interacting and coming together. And so this is why I like project teams or I like collaboration teams that we might have an issue, a problem, a project, a product, a service, whatever it might be, giving your background, where you bring in all of these diverse teams from different people from different departments, different backgrounds, and you ask them to be able to work and solve and do this. Whatever the task might be, right? So you have those cross-functional collaboration kind of happening. That allows people to learn from one another and people can respect and they get to know that everyone has something to bring and they can respect for the differences that exist between the two. It also helps with idea generation, or I like to call ideation, because it brings new perspectives in, it challenges our assumptions, it challenges ways that we've been doing things, and it really encourages us to look at things from different angles because we're all got different perspectives, right? So we bring in different people. I will tell you, being part of some of these collaboration teams in the past, it's very great, especially from a leadership standpoint when we have like leaders who might be brought in when we're talking about a strategic issue, where we bring in people who are not only from HR, but people from, finance or accounting, from IT, from sales, from operations, from fulfillment. When we have all of these different people brought into the group and begin to talk about the strategic components, not only did it allow us to really get some good perspectives and ideas, but it also allowed us to be able to see what role all of us play in this bigger business problem and really helped us to garner a lot more respect for one another and being able to have these discussions and working together as a team. So I think that's a big component of this as well. And that leads down to the last one, which is strengthening relationships with diverse stakeholders because we begin to respect one another for the perspectives that we bring. And that allows us to work more closely together where we can develop more inclusive products, services, and initiatives that's going to serve our customer base, our client base, even better, depending on our industry and the business that we're in. So this cross-functional collaboration, idea generation, and problem solving, and the strengthening relationships. These are all ways that thought diversity for an organization can work and bring success overall as you try to implement that into your culture. So As we wrap up today, hopefully you've gained some great insight and understanding to this idea of thought diversity and what it is, and why this is a significant strategy we should be implementing in from our culture into our culture. So key takeaways I want you to remember is one, thought diversity drives innovation, customer centricity, and inclusive cultures because all of those customers out there all have different and unique needs and perspectives. And the more that you can reflect your employees, have a reflection of in your employees what your customers are, the more we know we'll be able to meet those needs. We also know that thought diversity aligns with the evolving societal and organizational expectations. If you haven't checked lately, your expectations from your employees continue to grow, continue to get more on what they want from you. I think back to my grandparents' age when they were actually working and what their expectation was from their employer was a paycheck. I think back to my parents' expectation was from their employer and it was loyalty and longevity. I think back to Generation X, my generation from that, and it really is about being able to be heard, right? And now we look at what, millennials want and Generation Y wants, and then we've got Generation Alpha who will be coming in. It's changing more. Millennials now wants us to be able to, they want from us for us to be able to help them understand and build their career and get the skills that they need, etc. And they're all different. It's all changing, right? So we have to make sure that we're in alignment with that when we think about this idea of thought diversity and what our people want from us within the organization. So, as we wrap up here today, I just want to take a moment and ask you this, right? Clever, huh? Thought diversity. So, what do you think? What do you think about this idea of thought diversity in your organization? What do you think of this idea of this thought diversity being the next frontier, no longer focusing on demographics, but really focusing on contributions? What people can actually contribute because of their unique identities that they bring to the table and how they're able to share and how they're able to problem solve and ideate. This is the world that we're living in. This is the world that we're going toward. This is the new workforce of tomorrow. So we have to think about how do we build thought diversity into our cultures. So I want to thank you so much again. And I know this is a recorded session. And if you do have questions, you can always feel free to reach out to me. Here's my contact information. You can scan the QR code to go to our website. And also, if you would like to, you can sign up for our newsletter. We do a free quarterly newsletter, and this QR code will get you signed up for the newsletter and allow you to be able to get those things that we have up, letting you know about all of our different up and coming events and education and all types of things and resources that you might find beneficial to you. So I want to thank you so much for being here at this conference and being with me today. Again, my name is Jeremy York. I'm with InvigorateHR, and I hope that you have a great rest of the conference. Thank you.